Hello, my name is Cecilia Leishman, and this is my final project presentation on Keith Haring, titled Keith Haring Acting Up. So my thesis statement for the final research paper is as follows. Keith Haring was a prolific LGBTQ+ activist and artist throughout the 1980s, rising to celebrity status with his iconic motifs and colorful style. After being diagnosed with HIV/AIDS in 1988, Haring spent the last 3 years of his life creating hundreds of works in reference to the HIV/AIDS epidemic and advocating for safe sex. Haring collaborated with ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, to further educate the public about the AIDS epidemic. This essay will focus on Haring's later works, such as Ignorance Equals Fear, Silence Equals Death, Safe Sex, Stop AIDS, and Silence Equals Death. Here is a photograph of Keith Haring in front of one of his murals. So, Haring was born on May 4th, 1958, in rural Pennsylvania, and he died of AIDS-related complications on February 16th, 1990, in New York City. He briefly attended the Pittsburgh Ivy School of Professional Art with intentions of getting a degree in commercial art before dropping out after 2 semesters. He then went to New York to attend the School of Visual Arts on a scholarship to study painting. I believe he ended up also dropping out of the School of Visual Arts in New York City. But when he was alive, he founded the Pop Shop in 1986, which was a boutique that made his art available and accessible to everyone, as well as the Keith Haring Foundation in 1989, which is meant to sustain, expand, and protect the legacy of Keith Haring, his art, and his ideals. The foundation supports not-for-profit organizations that assist children, as well as organizations involved in education, prevention, and care related to AIDS. During his time on Earth, he had over 100 solo and group exhibitions, created multiple murals, and put out an impressive body of work, containing probably around 10,000 pieces of art. So here is Keith Haring in the New York subways. He initially gained traction in the New York art scene through his street art along the blank advertisement boards in the subways. The subway was used by thousands of people each day, which allowed his work to be seen by a wide public audience. The act of creating this graffiti was really performative. He captivated audiences with his way of working, quickly filling out the black matte paper with chalk illustrations in order to avoid arrest, as creating public art in this way was illegal, or I believe still is. This quick method of working helped him develop his iconic linear style with recognizable forms and simple figures. So not only was he developing a visual language that was easy to make, he was also avoiding arrest. It was notorious enough for the public to recognize and pin him as a local icon. So this way of presenting public art to the population of New York really boosted him into a celebrity status, which allowed him to land gallery spots and larger art gigs. To really drive home how much of an icon Keith Haring was during the 80s, here he is with Andy Warhol and John Michael Vasquez, who he was close friends with. His murals, such as the Houston Bowery mural on the upper left here, was created in 1982, and the Crack is Whack mural on the right here was created in 1986, were another way that Haring presented his work to the public. Crack is Whack especially, which was responding to the crack epidemic of New York City, really solidified Haring's social political presence in the art world. His work may be colorful and cartoon-like you can see in these 2 murals as well as the previous slides, but it really addressed hard-hitting issues affecting New York and to an extent the world at the time. Issues such as drugs, sex, religion, war, and of course, AIDS. So, what is HIV/AIDS? HIV, or the human immunodeficiency virus, is a virus that attacks your immune system and can be transmitted through contact with infected blood. So sharing needles or through unprotected sex through semen or vaginal fluids. Human bodies can't really get rid of HIV, and no effective HIV cure exists. So once you have HIV, you have it for life. AIDS is a late stage of HIV. It's chronic, meaning if you were to get HIV and reach the point of the infection that you develop AIDS, then you would die. When this disease was first identified in 1981, no medications existed, and no one fully understood how it spread or what it really was. In fact, a lot of doctors initially thought it was an aggressive form of cancer called Kaposi sarcoma because of the red and purple lesions that one can get from late-stage HIV/AIDS. Due to early cases being made up of almost entirely gay men, many referred to HIV/AIDS as gay cancer for the first 2 years of the epidemic because doctors thought it was this form of aggressive cancer, and also because, well, it was affecting primarily gay people at the time. A lot of misinformation was spreading around in these early AIDS years. People said that you could get it from sharing a glass of water or even shaking hands with an infected person. We, of course, found out later that this is wrong. But what HIV/AIDS is really one of humanity's deadliest and most persistent epidemics, the early years of which were, once again, filled with lots of confusion and death. During the first years of this epidemic, there was no medication to fight against the disease, and the federal government didn't seem to be listening. In fact, Congress didn't approve the first dedicated funding for AIDS research and treatment until July of 1983. Thanks to work done by activist groups, support groups, scientists, doctors, and artists like Keith Haring, a push in awareness and need for research as well as affordable treatments throughout the 80s led to where we are now. A place where, after millions of deaths, there's accessible medication and knowledge surrounding HIV. One can now take antiretroviral medicine, or ART, which can manage symptoms and allow people with HIV to live long lives as well as prevent them from transmitting HIV to sexual partners. There's now also methods of preventing getting HIV in the first place by taking medicine like PrEP and PEP. This is a really boiled down version of what happened in the early AIDS crisis and what HIV/AIDS is, but if we continued in detail, we would be here all day. So here we have Safe Sex by Keith Haring, created in 1988. 1988 was the same year he was officially diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. He was openly gay. He attended a lot of gay bars and bathhouses, and he'd seen tons of his friends and community members already get sick and die from the virus, so he himself knew it would reach him eventually. But after his diagnosis, he really made tons of work centered around AIDS and raising AIDS awareness. So with this one, we should have two figures here choosing to pleasure themselves externally versus internally. As said previously, HIV/AIDS can be spread through semen and vaginal fluids. This is a safer way of having sex, as you can see with the large words on top, safe sex. So Haring's celebrity status brought new discourse to the realm of high art. He could talk about these hard-hitting subjects like sex, risk, illness, and pleasure thanks to the previous works that he had done and the audience that he had. So he even reproduced this image as well as other images and sold them across various mediums to the public to farther get the message out about AIDS and safe sex, as well as raise money for AIDS research with the funds he gained from selling these images. So here's Haring again on the street demonstrating against, I believe the mayor of New York is shown on that poster, who didn't really handle the AIDS epidemic as well as he could. He was not only making art and raising awareness that way, but he was also attending these demonstrations and on the ground when he was still physically able to before his diagnosis rendered him unable to. Stop AIDS 1989 is another piece by Keith Haring that was used to create attention and raise awareness of HIV/AIDS. This message is much more direct. It shows two figures forming together as a sort of weapon to fight AIDS. AIDS in this case is shown as this red snake figure here being cut in half with the word Stop AIDS at the bottom of the piece. With no one talking about AIDS really directly, Haring had to do so while fighting the disease himself. I'd like to point out that this piece was also made in 1989, which is the same year that he established the Keith Haring Foundation. So he's also really facing his mortality and the end of his artistic legacy during this time as well. So, AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, or ACT UP, is a grassroots political group working to end the AIDS pandemic. The group was founded in 1987 thanks in a large deal to Larry Kramer, who is an American author, public health advocate, film producer, and, of course, LGBTQ rights activist. The group works to improve the lives of people affected by AIDS through direct action, so protests and demonstrations, as well as medical research funding, medical treatment advocacy, and working to change legislation and public policies regarding public health. Their early demonstrations included marching on Wall Street to demand greater access to experimental AIDS drugs, lower prices of these drugs, and for a coordinated policy from the government in regards to fighting the disease. They also showed up to demonstrate with the Silence Equals Death project at the New York City Post Office the day taxes were due on April 15th, which the audience was not only people filing late-minute tax returns at the post office, but also the televisions of people tuning in to hear news about people filing late-minute tax returns. So people would come and kind of film this event, and ACT UP took that in order to reach a larger audience. The image to the right here is of David Wojnarowski's jacket, who was another AIDS activist and artist. And the jacket says, "If I die of AIDS, forget burial, just drop my body on the steps of the FDA." This image has circulated the internet a lot, and it alludes to the ACT UP demonstration at the Federal Drug Administration offices. So the demonstration received national media coverage. ACT UP members called for demands in FDA drug approval processes to make experimental drugs available to the public more quickly with more accessibility in regards to price point of these drugs. The protest was actually so successful that they shut down the FDA for a day, and government agencies dealing with AIDS like the FDA as well as the National Institute of Health actually began to listen to ACT UP in regards to creating a new public health policy. So here's a snapshot of one of the many demonstrations ACT UP spearheaded. Notice the Silence Equals Death poster that is held up here, as well as worn by a couple of these demonstrators up front. This image, a pink triangle against a black backdrop with the word Silence Equals Death, was originally an advertisement for the Silence Equals Death project and used by ACT UP, but it's now really connected to activism around the AIDS epidemic. The Silence Equals Death project was created in 1987 during the AIDS crisis as a consciousness-raising and mutual support group. They created the poster because of its simple, straightforward message that could reach large audiences throughout New York. They chose the pink triangle as a callback into LGBTQ history. The triangle was used in the 30s and the 40s for means of marking gays, lesbians, and other queer folk for persecution in Nazi Germany. The slogan, Silence Equals Death, was really straightforward and to the point, making it seem like more of an advertisement. It's really declarative, provocative, and meant to stimulate inquiry from an audience. And here we are back to Keith Haring. This is Silence Equals Death, created in 1989. There are a few iterations of this pink triangle imagery with figures filling in the form that Keith Haring created. They're all under the same name of Silence Equals Death and all created in the short time scale post-AIDS diagnosis, pre-death of Haring. So the pink triangle being the same reclaimed symbol used by multiple LGBTQ plus and AIDS activist groups at the time. The white line figures in these pieces that lay within and around the triangle really create a kind of like memorizing pattern with the way they're posed, covering their eyes, ears, and mouth, and referencing the three wise monkeys that see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. So he's using this well-known symbol in both activist groups, but also known by now to the public, and calling out the public's ignorance of AIDS. So they're pretending to not see or hear or speak about what's going on with this epidemic that's killing millions of people, or ended up killing, I believe, like 4 million people. And he also, I believe he created a few of these for ACT UP. It's really hard to find on the internet which ones exactly, because there's so many iterations of this pink triangle that he did. So Ignorance Equals Fear, Silence Equals Death, done by Haring in 1989, is a lithograph print and a standing culmination of all the ideas that we have previously covered. The three figures cover their eyes, ears, and mouth, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, the evil in question, of course, being AIDS. The top register of the piece says ignorance equals fear, a to-the-point message to the viewer. Ignorance of the AIDS epidemic was caused by fear of AIDS. Silence equals death on the bottom harkens to previous posters used by ACT UP, the Silence Equals Death Project, Grand Fury, so on and so forth. Not speaking about AIDS, whether you were diagnosed or not, could lead to death. Like, the government not speaking about AIDS led thousands to die, and then if you're in a community or have AIDS, no communicate that you have AIDS to because of shame or any other reason, that could lead to death. You could die from it because there just wasn't medication around at the time to fight that. At the point that this piece was created, due to the lack of action and communication around the epidemic, 1 American was diagnosed with AIDS every minute and 4 died from AIDS every hour in 1989. On the lower right, the triangle symbol and the words Fight AIDS, ACT UP. At this point, we already know what the triangle symbol is. And then the slogan Fight AIDS, ACT UP. This poster was created by Haring for ACT UP. So you can interpret it as Fight AIDS, ACT UP as like a slogan, or ACT UP, Fight AIDS as a call to action. It's really up for the viewer to interpret that portion of the piece, but otherwise it's a very straightforward piece. Haring died less than a year after creating this image, and even during his last moments, he was creating, advocating, and acting up for a cause that he believed in, which was the AIDS crisis. That brings an end to that portion of the presentation. The next few slides are going to be pieces of my own work in comparison to Keith Haring's work. So here's a work of mine that doesn't quite cover as hard of a hitting issue as AIDS, but does deal with the flux of queerness and gender identity. Queerness being something Haring spoke about in his life, embodied, and of course made art about. The blue on the male presenting figure and the pink on the female presenting figure, with the overlap of the two being purple, starts conversation about gender stereotypes. That overlapping purple can really mean anything. I wanted to leave it up to the viewer. Is it 2 male and female figures merging as one? Is it a relationship? Or is it a previously male person transitioning into a female? Or you could read it as vice versa, a female transitioning to a male. I like leaving things up for the audience to interpret and decide rather than a direct tell, which is really the opposite of what Haring did, especially in his layers works. He would usually have that direct statement on some of those pieces. This is a set of 4 wine label designs I did last year. Some of the figures, such as the plant-like cutouts, all throughout this, draw from Matisse, which Haring did a lot of drawbacks and callbacks to other artist movements, especially in like the street art scene, or in the sense of like the Science Equals Death poster, how that pink triangle symbol calls to the symbol used to persecute gay and lesbians in Nazi Germany. The primary red, yellow, and blue is also something that was done by Haring a lot, using those bright colors with simple figures to draw a viewer in. It's a bit poppier. It's meant for consumption because you want to draw someone in and buy your product if it's a wine label, which is also that's something Haring did with his pop shop pieces. And that brings the end to the presentation. Thank you.